Thank you very much. Bore da chi, good morning to you. Not a Welsh speaker, but I know how to say that because when I was in school, my headmaster, Mr. Lewis, said that every assembly started exactly the same way, almost hypnotically so. But actually what he said was, bore da chi, good morning to you, bow your heads please, because we did the Lord's Prayer. But for a long time, because I was so young, I thought that's how you said good morning in Welsh. And I would meet people, and I'd say, oh, Dean, this is my friend Garwin. I said, oh, good morning. Bore da chi, good morning, bow your heads please. And I was known as the weird kid. Because that's not how it works. I have done one talk before. There was a real-time translation. It was in Bologna, in Italy, and I met the translator beforehand, and she didn't know I sounded like this, and she was like a small, meek, 50-year-old English woman, and she was terrified. I said, oh, you sound like that. I do, yes. Hopefully I won't be using any big words in this talk about the fundamentals of neuroscience. Leadership is, personally, I have a sort of strange relationship with leadership. I've never set out to be a leader myself. My whole ethos, my output, is mostly concerned with learning stuff about the brain, and I just end up thinking, this is important information. I think more people should know about this, and try to put it out into the world. Very sort of singular pursuit. I'm self-employed. I'm sort of, I don't have any authorities apart from my wife. It's a whole other thing. But I sort of ended up becoming something of a leader almost accidentally. I have been told by many, many different people that my books, my work are cited by many students applying to get into medicine, psychology, neuroscience. I've actually had them reach out to me directly via social media or my contact forms. So people kids from all over the world saying, thank you, I am now pursuing medicine because of you, which is obviously incredibly flattering, incredibly grateful to hear that. But also like to point out to them, I didn't tell you to do that. That's very much your decision. If it all goes wrong, that's not my fault. So that's I have a strange sort of indirect relationship with leadership. But as a concept, as a scientific principle, it has a lot of research behind it. And it speaks to the fundamentals of what it means to be a human being with a human brain which works the way it does. Something very innate in our nature supports our feelings, our attitudes, our ability regarding leadership. And we can look into some of those. I do have a lot of words on my slides, unlike other speakers, but I am a writer. This is what I do, so apologies. Basically, what is a leader? If you ask, people have done surveys and lots of different questionnaires and stuff, you get a lot of different answers. A leader is the person in charge, whoever has the most authority, who makes the final decision, who's elected, the one with the most power, the boss, whoever gets most done, the person who coordinates, the smartest person in the group. These are all things people think a leader is, but each time, each one of those isn't necessarily a leader. You can be the boss, you're officially in charge of something, but it doesn't mean you lead. It doesn't mean you are a good leader. My previous boss, before I went full-time self-employed, lovely guy, very knowledgeable of the subject, absolutely useless at everything else. It was me and the secretary who was technically leading things because he didn't know what he was doing. He'd just been there for a long time. Whoever gets the most done, again, not necessarily the leader. You've got people delegate all the time. Sort of the admin staff tend to be the ones who get everything done. The smartest person in the group is actually quite a cliche that, you have the leader in sort of superhero teams and you have the geek off to the side. That's the smartest person, they're not the leader. So, all these preconceptions of what leaders are aren't necessarily requirements of leadership, and they aren't necessarily things leaders demonstrate. So it means different things to different people. So it can be quite a hard principle, hard concept to pin down. So what does it mean in terms of the human brain? How does the human brain perceive leadership? To understand that, we have to look at some more fundamentals of how our brains work. Social connections and relations are fundamentally important. Humans are an ultra-social species. We are the most social species on the planet. Our biggest cities are more densely populated than like termite mounds or anything like that. We actually outrank insects for the number of individuals who can live together in the same space. And that's really quite a good. And it doesn't mean we're all completely friendly with everyone, but we can put up with each other better than any other species. Like this room right now. There's like 100 people just sat there quietly, listening to a guy talk. If you were somehow magically transformed into chimps, in 5 minutes, we would be a different situation. Chimps are our closest relative in evolutionary terms. But if you all suddenly became chimps, in 5 minutes, half you'd be dead. And there'd be blood everywhere, feces all over the place. I don't know how these things normally end, but I'm going to say that's an unlikely outcome for this academic discussion. So we can do that. We are good at that. We can just put up with other people. And because relationships, interactions with other people is a vital part of our intelligence and our success as a species. one of the main theories of why we're as smart as we are, why we have these such big brains, which are like very demanding, very, very costly in the evolutionary sense, is because human tribes became so successful, so cooperative, that they removed the dangers from the outside world, which normally drive evolution, like, trying to find food, predators, camouflage, things like that. Didn't apply when you're part of a human tribe in the early days. So what we are now, being part of a tribe was more successful. So you have to form relationships and interact, remember who did what, who owes what to who. That requires a lot more brain power, so we evolved to be as smart as we are. And you can see this with the way our brains work in terms of certain things our brains do, which only make sense when other people are around. Specific emotions, guilt. You eat a cupcake, it's nice, that's fine. You find out it's someone else's cupcake, oh no, guilty. Embarrassment, like if I was in my room earlier on, if all my clothes fell off, I was like, oh, that's weird, that's not meant to happen. If it happens now, I'd be embarrassed. And you'd all be appalled, because that's not a good thing to happen. Rejection, social rejection, is really powerful. It has a sort of deep impact on us, even when it's illogical. They've done studies in this, like people playing the simulated game, and every time someone gets excluded from the game, they feel like a spike of psychological pain, rejection. And sometimes it was African-American subjects, and they were told the people who were interacted with were Klansmen. They were rejected by them. They still felt that sort of spike of psychological discomfort, even when that makes total sense. So you wouldn't want to be part of that sort of group, but just the act of rejection does make us very, very sort of sensitive to that. Empathy, very complex unconscious process. The ability to detect and share other people's emotions without even realizing it, really complex, but we've all done it. You've probably walked into a room and someone just had a blazing row. You don't know what happened. You weren't involved with it. You walk in and go, ooh, chilly in here, because they're giving off signals, all these signs. Our brains are extremely good at detecting and recreating. So it's really, we are very empathetic. And relationships are the groups and communities we feel part of, our key identity or sense of self. So the people around us, the ones we engage with, like other people are a good social feedback. They help us calibrate our sense of self, how the world works, who we are, because we are so social. So that's really important to keep in mind when talking about leaders and leadership and controlling, interacting, engaging with other people. And status comes into this too. We're not just social, we are aware of social status. How good am I in this group? Who's above me, who's below me? We are very hierarchical in that sense. High status can be obtained by approval, admiration, ability, success, and when you are higher status or accepted, I'm going to be like the glorious one, but you can just sort of be like, yeah, people like me, I have friends, that's nice. That is important for good well-being. Of course, what counts as success is very subjective. Some people are really into Pokemon or certain fandoms, and other people find that, well, that's daft. I don't care about that. But in their groups, they are successful. They are the most committed. They are the most adept at this particular skill, which other people have no place to value in. Doesn't matter. They are high status in their particular community and not outside it. It's all subjective. And low status, if you are like an outcast, someone's been rejected and stuff, you tend to be more prone to poor well-being, mental health issues, and things like that. And again, any social species will show this. Again, subjective, low status is often a good thing, or like logical. So if you just start a new job in a big organization, you don't expect to be the boss straight away, the CEO. You say, like, oh, yeah, I've got a job, this is good, I don't need to be high status. People understand the situation, the concept. We are able to understand that we don't necessarily have to be the one on top in every situation. Again, and high status does not require direct interaction. You don't have to sort of be directly interfacing with someone in order to achieve high status. Celebrities, footballers, parasocial relationships. You are emotionally invested in someone, they don't know you exist. It's a very sort of powerful and very common thing, believed to be an evolutionary, helpful process in order to make us more, give our brains practice in engaging in relationships. But these can have you can have influence over people and things like that. So a leader isn't necessarily someone who has met you even. They can just be a leader because you admire their traits or acknowledge their authority from a distance. A few other things to keep in mind which do impact on leadership. Humans tend to have a just world bias. We tend to, because of the way our brains work, we perceive the world around us and we assume it is inherently fair. Because we assume that hard work is rewarded, that good things happen to good people and bad people are punished, and things that you can do anything you set your mind to. These are all things we believe and are constantly told because we believe the world is a fair place. Effort in, results. Also, obviously, objectively, that's not necessarily true. There are plenty of ways in which the world isn't fair, because it isn't. It's mostly random. Brains don't like randomness. We don't like uncertainty, because uncertainty means you don't know what's going to happen. If you don't know what's going to happen, it means you can't do anything about it. You can't prepare for it, and therefore something bad happens, you are, flummoxed. And that's something we've sort of evolved to not like. And this colours our perception of the world and includes perception of and attitudes to leadership and authority. This person's the leader. Is it fair that they're the leader? Or like if you see the leader, well, it must be fair because the world is a fair place. It colours your view, your experience of leadership and how leaders affect you. And autonomy. Humans inherently like autonomy, and we don't like to have it removed. We want to be able to say we control our environments. It's a similar thing. So if we don't have any autonomy, then we can't do anything about bad things happening, and therefore we instinctively dislike it when our autonomy is removed. Again, subjective autonomy over actual autonomy. We just like to feel in control, even if we aren't necessarily. Like pedestrian crossings, we've all sort of used those. A button, it doesn't do anything. It's on a timer. But if we take the button away, people get very upset. They run across the road because they don't like being told, wait. So given the choice to wait, then that makes you feel better. A superstition, like, spill some salt, throw some over my shoulder, that'll prevent bad luck. None of that makes any sense. None of that can actually work in terms of how the universe works as we know it. That doesn't mean anything. But we do it because it feels like we have control. Oh no, a bad thing will happen. I will prevent it by doing this. So we retain our sense of autonomy, even though it objectively doesn't really mean anything. And of course, leaders, by their nature, will reduce autonomy for those they are leading in some shape or form. Of course, effective leaders make this look like a good thing, or well, it could be good. They make the people they lead in appreciate this or accept it as something which has to happen. For reasons like they are better at this than me. We've seen plenty of examples of good leaders. Like, oh, I can't do this, you do it, you're in charge. I don't want that responsibility. Responsibility comes with a lot of there's a lot of mental pressure with that. It's stressful. Some people don't like that, and especially it's not something they really want to do. So, someone else taking responsibility is often viewed as a good thing. I can just focus what I'm good at. Related, like you think my skill set is this. I'm not good at that, and therefore I want to just do what I'm good at. You see that a lot in organizations. Someone who's particularly good at a certain role, so offered a leadership role or offered promotion, they don't want it. Because that's not their skill set, that's not their priority as they see it. They want to do what they're good at and let someone else handle that side of things. And I feel like a valued part of this team. If someone is leading and you're a part of the team and then you feel like your contribution is meaningful, you don't mind that. That's good. You actually want that. Of course, then you could argue that choosing to follow a leader is still autonomy. A good leader can make you do that. Follow me is, okay, that's good. I've decided this, therefore I'm part of this team. This is a leader. I'm happy to be led. This happens like lots of different mechanisms behind this, a lot of different psychologies to it. Different cultures have different approaches to this, as we will see later on. But it's ultimately leaders. A good leader, particularly a good leader, will not make you, but also encourage you or compel you to follow them because their skills and their abilities are demonstrable. You can see that. So these are all things like how our brains process and recognize leaders and the act of leadership, which does impact on how effective leaders can be and how effectively we can be led, or whoever's being led in this place. So, because we're so social and invest so much in status, we tend to form groups with hierarchies. So obviously we sort of gather together. We have our core groups, our communities, our identities, and things like that. And because of the status thing, we tend to look up to and trust those of higher status, and look down at those lower status. And sometimes that could be a bit of an aggressive thing. One way to make yourself feel better is to make someone else feel worse. It's an unfortunate but unavoidable human trait we all seem to have. And that's just something how a human is structured. Like you can sort of see how this would have evolved. Primitive tribe. So a danger appears. There's a tiger coming. One person says, "Follow me, run." Okay, let's follow this guy. We're safe. They sat around debating it, like what is the nature of this tiger? Is it hungry? Who is the most responsible for the act of tiger eating? That's a big debate. Then you all get slaughtered. That's how things worked in the old days. So leaders are ones who take charge and do it quickly. Whereas democracy is great, but when the threat's bearing down on you, you don't really have time for it. So instinctively we tend to trust those of higher status. And obviously, modern organizations have an official hierarchy. It's structured. It's sort of imposed from the nature of the company. And those at the top of the hierarchy are logically in charge. They have authority, but then that does not necessarily mean they're a leader, or at least a good leader. Because obviously you can have people higher up your hierarchy in work, and they've been sort of brought in from the outside, like we don't even know this person, never met them before, but they've got the right qualifications, so they're in charge now. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it obviously makes it a bit trickier than if this totally unfamiliar person is suddenly your leader, or at least your authority. Like, how do you process that? How does that sort of come across? And obviously you would fall back on all these different sort of instinctive measures. You sort of think, okay, so presumably they've qualified for this. I don't have that qualification, so they must be in charge. Or you think, oh, someone knows someone, or there's a whole nepotism thing, or there's lots of different ways to process that. So a good leader will preempt that and have ways to sort of nullify, or at least moderate that sort of uncertainty around whether or not they should be the leader. So we'll ask again people, what is a leader? What does a leader do? What do they have? They're expected to have authority, seniority, responsibility, intelligence, ability and understanding, experience, people skills, charisma, resilience, long-term thinking, objectivity. That's a lot. That's a lot to expect of any one person. And it's quite reasonable if a good leader doesn't have every single one of these things. All of these things are useful and good to have, but they don't necessarily make you a good leader. If you did have all of them, odds are you will be. But you could do without some. You need some are more important than others. Depends on the context, depends on the time, depends on the place, depends on the organization. Lots of different qualities are attributed to good leaders, and they have some of them, not all of them, but they're not all essential, because that would be a lot to ask. But if you find someone who does have all these things, they tend to be quite liked as a leader type of person. Okay, so research into leadership, some separate good leaders or leaders, effective leaders, into two types. You've got your task leaders. They're the ones who essentially, direct behavior, delegation, coordination, they get stuff done. They're the ones, okay, if this person in charge, we will get done what needs to be done. They may not be sort of a more engaging person. They may be very much a head down, do as you're told, I'm going to get this done. But they do get things done. We probably grow up with a certain teachers like that, or coaches. They're like, no nonsense. I don't want to talk to you, I'm just here to do the job, and they do it. So they can be very effective leaders in that respect. But you've got to compare that to the other type, the socio-emotive leaders. They're the ones encouraging, inspiring. They talk to people, they engage. They provide psychological well-being, motivation, reassurance to group members. Them being in charge makes you, them being the leader, makes you feel good about being part of the group, because they are very effective at that. They are very good emotional skills. And of course, the best leaders would be a combination of both. They get stuff done, and they do it in a way which people like. They're very good at delegation, and the people like being delegated to, because they go, this is a good leader, this is a person who inspires me. And of course, they're not necessarily mutually exclusive, because someone being very good at this, getting things done, they're often inspirational. They don't say much, but they're really good at their jobs. That could be really quite inspiring. And if someone is inspiring you to work harder, you work harder. You get stuff done. So they are very good at getting the job completed because of their people skills. So they're not mutually exclusive, but some prioritize others and one over the other. And you get different types, different manifestations. So that's two sort of approaches to leadership styles in the literature. And there's another sort of approach, dominance versus prestige. This can be really quite telling, or quite a big impact on how effective a leader is, or how a leader is perceived. Dominance leadership is control, authority is sort of taken by conflict, competition, beat out others for highest role. It tends to skew towards a more authoritarian leadership approach. So I want to be in charge, and I will do everything I can to make sure that happens. We see various examples of this around the world right now. Not always a good outcome, but it is one way of becoming a leader. So I want to be in charge. I'm going to do everything I can to make that happen, and they succeed. And therefore, you have people with authority and a sort of dominant approach. This also tends to lead towards the whole rule by fear thing. It's I want to be in charge. I want to make sure that there are no threats to my authority, so I'm going to suppress that. And you retain leadership that way. Prestige leadership is more given, granted. due to positive relations with and respect from the group. It's basically the fundamental point of democracy. Like, we want this person to be in charge, we will vote for them, therefore they are in charge now. They are our leader because we have decided so. Obviously a bit more sort of fluid, a bit more back and forth there. Your authority as a leader comes from those you're leading. So that obviously makes it a bit more complex, because then you have to sort of do what they want, but also you're still the leader. So, it psychologically starts to get a little bit blurry there. And there are pros and cons to both approaches, of course. If you're more of a dominance leader, you tend to get stuff done faster because no one wants to argue with you and you're very more forthright. But also, it can lead to resentment and issues, shall we say. So it's not necessarily the best approach, but it's just one that's recognized that some people tend to adhere to. And of course, in the modern world, with organizations, we have assigned leaders, like I said, which sort of blur the lines a bit more. This person is your leader now. You don't know them. They don't know you. They just have the job because we decided they should. The people are ultimately in charge. That leads to a strange sort of setup. So leader appointed by heads of organization, promotions or creation of new positions in hierarchy leads to more complexity. So it's like, okay, I'm like, for both sides, we need to be led, I need to lead. I don't even know anything about you guys. Where do we start from here? So again, good leaders can manage that and can sort of work with that, and acknowledge it is usually a good way of starting. But then in this organization, you've got fighting for promotion is a form of dominance leadership. Earning promotion due to performance and good reputation is prestige. But these, again, not mutually exclusive. You can want to be promoted, and therefore you show your best side. You sort of make everyone like you because you really want the job, but also you're good at people, and therefore they decide to give you the job because you fought for it. It overlaps a lot. So not mutually exclusive, lots of different ways to achieve leadership or become leaders, and all have their own sort of pros and cons, ups and downs and things like that. And also it's important to acknowledge status versus power. Someone in a leadership position because they are high status or powerful, but not recognized as high status, or basically it's when someone's put in charge and those subordinates do not recognize that they should have this role. You can see, again, happens a lot in political context and things like that. But so when you have someone who's put in a leadership position and you don't feel that they should have that position because you think they obtained it unfairly, or you think someone else should have had the role, or you just don't agree with their policy and style, that can lead to a strange sort of friction, psychological friction, that you have authority, I do not think you should have it, and therefore that really impacts people's perception of how leaders should work. They think you're high status, I do not. I do not agree with the parameters they have set down. And again, different groups perceive things differently, of course. So different parts of the different organization could say, yes, this is the best person. That people say no, and that leads to further confusion. Powerful individuals tend to have more control, but without status respect, they're usually less able to effectively lead, or position is more precarious. Like I said, like the whole thing of ruled by fear or ruled by sort of dominance. I'm in charge, do as you're told. That can be effective in the short term, but it doesn't lead to sort of good relationships with subordinates. It's not a good way of like delegating. It's just like barking orders. That's control without the sort of respect, without the sort of appreciation. You recognize as a bad leader, that means your ability to lead is less effective. And a lot of research shows that if you've got happy workers or happy people in the organization, they tend to be more productive. Someone who likes being in this group, someone who likes the leader, will be more productive. They want to do things that the leader says because they are a good leader. So you get more done that way. So if you're an authoritarian leader and sort of stamping your foot a lot, yeah, you might get stuff done. But if you are more compelling, more engaging, people will willingly do stuff for you more because they want to. And of course, yeah, unwilling or dictated loss of autonomy tends to have significant psychological consequences. If you take someone's authority away, someone's autonomy away just by being a sort of ineffective leader, or if you were like someone's on the promotion pathway to put someone else in their place, that tends to have like significant impacts. So these are decisions you really have to be careful about when assigning or appointing leaders, or like changing the hierarchy, changing the status. Again, leadership can be obtained via status, but then lost. They still have power, but less ability to use it. Happens all the time in politics. Someone's swept in to the highest office on a wave of support, and then pretty quickly They do something people don't agree with. I don't like them anymore, but they're still in charge. And that sort of diminishes their leadership abilities. And also you have something called the overachieving the Peter Principle, where the Peter Principle describes the phenomenon where people get promoted according to their abilities and then one step higher. Like you're good at this job, promotion, promotion, promotion. Then you're at this, at the peak of your abilities and you get promoted again, and now you're past your abilities. I can't do this, I don't know what I'm doing. And there was this originates from the 60s, I think, where they said, why are there so many bad managers around? Well, it's one argument. There are others. So, there's so many different psychological processes which lead into leadership and the effectiveness of leadership, how leaders are perceived and how they work, how they function, and how we perceive them. So these are all different things which can feed into the perception of leadership and the effectiveness of leadership, all based on the way our brains tend to work. Like happy workers, when you're in a good mood, you tend to be more animated, more motivated, so you're more productive. Simple, straightforward explanation for that. But nothing but happy workers tend to be not as good because you always need someone who is like planning for the worst possible scenario. So you need the person in the organization who is a bit of a gloomy one, things like that. So there's no real straightforward, direct answer like what makes a good leader. It is constantly in flux, and it really much depends on the situation, the context, the organization, the group that you're expecting to lead and be led. So, hang on, let's double up that one. So, summary of this part of the talk. Humans are hierarchical by nature, thanks to our brain's work. Leaders are natural, so we do seek leaders out. We want leaders. We want someone to be in charge. We want someone to inspire us, someone to tell us what's right and what's wrong, tell us what to do, because we are that social. So whatever organization you have, you'll eventually have someone who's in charge of it. So like I know there's some people have would like to have a more sort of equal society, purely equal, could work, but that's not really how we're wired. We always want to defer to someone to make the final decision. People also want autonomy, though. Balance in hierarchy, authority, and autonomy of others, big part of leading effectively. One of the sort of biggest complaints of people in big organizations is that they can spend like months working on something, putting their efforts towards something, and then suddenly a new boss comes in, okay, scrap all that, we're starting something new. That's months and months of work and effort, which now has no outcome, no results, and that can be very sort of psychologically draining, very, very demotivating. Sometimes it's necessary, but it's not good for those who are being affected. No acknowledgement of your efforts, no acknowledgement of your contribution to a group and organization is a key part of loss of motivation. But worker motivation, people's motivation is persistently low in all the studies which you see done. Leadership style shapes and is shaped by the group being led and its characteristics. Of course, a good leader can change the group, like take over this organization, it's dysfunctional, there's like a hostile workplace. A good leader can change that, because they make the tough decisions and alter the dynamics between everyone. So if you end up with a leadership position, it doesn't have to stay like that. Leader is not completely confined to the expectations and parameters that exist already. Leaders change things. That's almost like the point sometimes. So like these things are so persistent, but also quite flexible. You don't really need to have like, well, we have this organization, it's like this, we only have this type of leader. No, a good leader can change that and make things better because that's kind of what they're for. And yeah, there's a big difference between being in charge and being a good leader. Authority and leadership are not the same thing. Control and leadership are not the same thing. Leaders get stuff done. Leaders are sort of people, ideally, people want to be in charge. People want to do what they're telling them because they are a good leader. And there's a good sense of harmony, sort of towards a common goal. Good leaders can make this part of their sort of output, part of their dynamic. Task leaders, socio-emotive leaders, conflict leaders, prestige leaders, appointed leaders, and more, all different types of leadership recognized by the psychological literature. There probably are others that I haven't covered here, but we get into the political, the economic, the philosophical. These are all different aspects of leadership. So leadership's been a big part of human society for many, many, many years now, and forever. I don't want to say many years, like it's been like 2016 or something. And that is, we've sort of evolved this way. We are actually very, very, prone to leadership dynamics and change like that. So, yeah, so leaders are kind of inevitable, and good leaders are the ones who recognize like leadership is necessary and do their best with it. Of course, being a good leader now does not automatically mean remaining a good leader indefinitely. People and circumstances constantly in flux. Things change, like organizations change, priorities change, bad luck happens, and a good leader, one of the things which people respect out of certain leaders is that they know when their time is up. So like, okay, I was the good leader for this, but now I'm not, so someone else should take charge. So being able to give up leadership when necessary, even if it's just with delegating or recognizing things like that, that's a good quality of leadership. And you know when your own limitations, knowing your, if you're best for the role now, or will you still be best for the role later on? So that's another thing to keep in mind, because things are so constantly in flux. People are not static. We are very, very, constantly changing, constantly moving individuals, and that makes us a bit more, hard to pin down. So you get all these like management books saying like, this is how you lead people. You need these type of personalities. Those all tend to be very, very, very oversimplified because typical individual human is very, very, very complicated, and people want easy answers how to lead them. There usually aren't any because we are complicated individuals with minds of our own, which is a good thing, but not helpful in organizations. Okay, so that's the basic psychology part of it. Hopefully it was useful. But now I'm going to sort of focus on the Welsh perspective. This is also Academy Wales. How does Welsh culture and Welsh identity affect development, perception, and effectiveness of leaders of leadership? Does it? Got a couple of minutes. So if I could ask you now, just sort of in your groups, if you could think of anything about sort of Welsh culture or Welsh identity which impacts on leadership, then just amongst yourselves, and then I'll sort of go through the things that I've found, because there's no sort of official research of this that I can find. If anyone has a grant going, I'll do it myself. But so basically, Welshness. How does that affect leadership? So a couple of minutes, just see what you think of that. Okay, hopefully you've all thought of some interesting stuff about Welsh culture, our proclivities, our dynamics. So let's see if it sort of marries onto stuff that the research I've done. So for this, sorry, give me a second. Yeah. For this, I figured we could use a case study. So case study in Welsh leadership. This is Evelyn Seward, born in 1911 in Pontycymer, the Garrow Valley, also known as Mam Seward, also known as my great-grandmother. Yes, it's a Welsh talk, believe it or not. Someone I know. Now, yes, 9 kids, head of the clan, like everyone called her Mam, even though she wasn't their mother or grandmother. Very sort of lovely woman, passed away at age 96. Great with quotes. One time at her 89th birthday, I asked her, oh, Mammy, how do you feel about your birthday? And her quote, well, you know what? If I could live my life again, I wouldn't live this long. Okay. Happy birthday to you as well. That's nice. And another famous one, my wife is Indian, and love my great-grandmother, but she had classical views about people not from this country, but she loved her grandkids and great-grandkids. And my mother told her Christmas Day, she was sat on the sofa just watching something, because I'll break the news to Mam about your girlfriend. Okay, I'll do it. No, I'll do it, because she has views. And he said, Dean's got a girlfriend now. He's, lovely. I said, she's wonderful, she's beautiful. She's Indian. And there's a good 90-second pause. You can almost hear the wheels going round. And her full quote, her only opinion on the subject was, I met that Gandhi. No, I didn't meet him. I saw him in his box. I tell you this now, not enough meat in his legs to make broth. Good. But, no, she's very much sort of like the classic Welsh mum, the matriarch. Obviously, 9 kids, back in those days, very much a leader. But particular example, on every election day, first thing in the morning, she would take her chair outside the polling station, and anyone who walked past got yelled at until they went in and voted for Labour. Literally, towards the end of the day, if she had a list of people who hadn't voted yet, and if they hadn't voted, she'd send my mother and my auntie up to their houses to knock on the door and said, Mam said you got to vote. She goes, oh, Christ, sorry. I would need to stress, no one asked her to do this. She had no affiliation with the Labour Party whatsoever. Now, you might say, isn't that election interference? Isn't that illegal? You'd be right. This is the 1960s in the Valley. It was still illegal, but they didn't care. Basically, there were 3 or 4 cops who lived there, and they were also subjected to this treatment. Oh, God, got to vote. Now, she cared a lot, obviously. This is a sort of a very forthright move to make. Every election happened, everything the same. But no, people did. People did not want to upset Mam. They didn't want to cross Mam because she was very, very sort of like, had a lot of authority. She was a leader in the community. Lots of other things too. But I like to think she's a good example of Welsh leadership in the sort of very classic Welsh community. And I think a lot of the stuff which she was about, which she embodies, shows like sort of a good, shows like Welsh culture in a macrocosm and how things sort of can be affected. So here are some of the things I thought were relevant. So Welsh traits that intersect with leadership: strong community identity. Everyone knew Mam. Right? She was the matriarch of the valley, of the village. But we do sort of have that. Being Welsh is a very, very powerful part of your identity. We're very proud of it. We're very sort of proud people, which is good. But also, like, we have strong relations to our own community. We strongly identify our own community, which can perhaps impact on identifying those outside of it. Can you sort of relate to someone from a non-Welsh community if you're sort of trying to put in charge? But when you have this sort of strong identity with your community, it can be a bit tricky to move beyond that. So if you're like a Welsh person put in charge of another thing, that could be sort of a bit trickier. Very traditionally defined roles. Mam was the matriarch, obviously a very classic Valley stereotype, but there was no question of her ever like going down the mine or anything like that. So she had very much strong particular roles. And it was very much gender expectations, things like that. And we do have a sort of affinity for that, perhaps. Sort of like, well, this is how people do what people do. I'm a neuroscientist from the South Wales Valleys. In most people's eyes, that's not a thing. It's just like, no, you don't. You don't do that because that's not your area. And I've met people who are extremely surprised. I got my first writing job at The Guardian, and it was all arranged online. But I had to go to the offices to actually sort of sign the contracts and stuff. And I met my editor there. I was in reception. And if you've never been to The Guardian headquarters, think of every stereotype you think of The Guardian, that. All completely correct. Nice, but also like, yep, you guys are very on brand. And I was just sat there waiting in the reception. My editor came and said, oh, hello, Dean, is it? It's me, James. Said, I bet how are you doing this? Oh, good Lord. Very much like one of them's got in vibes going on. So yeah, it's not something which travels outside our community, apparently. Like we have this expectation of what people do and what sort of role they take, and people who defy that tend to be not suspicion, but surprise. So I do think we can be a bit sort of parochial in that regard. Welsh language will also be a factor. We're very proud of our language, but bear in mind, whatever you think of history, we're a culture which has emerged from many, many years of it being suppressed, actively suppressed by more powerful forces. And that obviously will have a long-term cultural impact. We're trying to sort of restart the language now, but it doesn't really apply much outside of Wales. So if you're a Welsh speaker and you go outside of Wales, to sort of accept a position there, it can sort of colour that. It's not necessarily a bad thing, but it is sort of, the language we speak do tend to reflect our internal psyche and things like that. So it is a very sort of, it's a factor to bear in mind. We try to promote the language, but other people outside of it don't like that, and that's not their business, but it's a thing. It's a thing to consider. Obviously, the Welsh love art and performance. Mam was very much in the choir, like Crockshaw, things like that. We do have this real affinity with art and performance. And obviously, a lot of Welsh schools very much prioritise art and performance, like Eisteddfod. It's a great part of the culture. But also, art and performance aren't viewed as high value by the wider world a lot of the times. I think that's a shame, but it is the case. So like STEM subjects and things like that, those tend to be what are more respected, shall we say, by the wider world. So if you are someone who's like got the classic Welsh love of art and expression and poetry and things like that, it can be seen as sort of like lower status than someone who's got more intellectual pastimes. And again, I don't think that's fair, because art and creativity are just as intellectual as anything else, in terms of the brain works, definitely, but it's just how the world sees things. So it can make it a bit more sort of tricky, perhaps, for a Welsh person to obtain the leadership role in a non-Welsh context. Just a factor to consider. Yes, very communal, very group pursuits. Obviously, you've got more than 2 Welsh people, you've got a choir. Everyone knows that. And Mama's all about that. The Valley, all stuff, all about groups doing things together, and that could be sort of like a certain mindset. We gravitate towards our communities. Obviously, the classic thing about Welsh, love forming committees. Everyone's got a committee. We love a committee, and that's fine, but it can be inefficient. It can be a bit sort of like if you put a committee, who's in charge? That's very much a sort of flat organisation, but it can lead to sort of slower decision-making. And if you're inclined to sort of be part of a committee or part of a group like that, you don't necessarily put yourself forward for a leadership role. So that sort of inclination to sort of be part of the group is good, but also can be counterproductive when you're trying to find leaders and people who take charge of things. The religion thing too, I say Mum was a churchgoer every sort of Sunday and every sort of Wednesday, I think, she used to go to church, and that's a very classic thing about Welsh communities. We're very church-going, very heavily church-going. But also church-going in religion is almost like a deference to authority. So it sort of encourages that. And obviously that sort of mindset doesn't lead itself to sort of taking control. And like thinking, I could do this, I can do that better. That might be sort of a factor to consider as well. If you brought him in a sort of classic Welsh church-going community, that would be perhaps counterproductive to finding notable leaders. And gratitude for external factors, that is something I've sort of found a lot. Like Mum was adamant with Labour because she had babies before the NHS was a thing. The NHS arrived, and she was extremely grateful for that and wanted to make sure everyone was aware of this, which I respect. But also there's a certain thing of, again, I don't know if it's persistent, but it's sort of, we tend to, we tend to downplay our achievements a lot. I used to be part of the comedy scene, and I used to try to apply for, stuff in Welsh media, and English speaking, not necessarily S4C, obviously, because that's a whole other thing. But, if you are someone who comes through the comedy scene in Wales, and it's not so bad as this now, but for a while it was a case of, okay, they didn't really want to know, if you went to London and came back, oh, that's great, you're official now, because you went to London, which is proper, not this. And I don't know why, it probably comes from somewhere, but we do tend to downplay our own achievements. They're like modest, mustn't be head above the parapet. Compared to the Scottish and Irish across the world, they are very loud about what they sort of do and like who they are, and tend not to do that so much when you're Welsh. We tend to be sort of more introspective. We don't sort of emphasise our contribution to the world, and we really should. The NHS is an iron bevan. Obviously, it's a huge factor of that. Apparently, on the American Declaration of Independence, there are more Welsh signatures than any other group. We're a big part of that. And one thing I do tend to bring up a lot is the randomised control trial. Now, in the 1950s, Archie Cochrane, Scottish physician, was assigned to Cardiff, the Welsh Health Board there, and noticed that all the miners being treated for pneumoconiosis were getting sort of different levels of treatment, different types of treatment, and responding differently. Because at that time, it's basically, you had a doctor, whatever they thought was the best, you had to do that, and then that's what you got. Now, he thought there was an inefficient way of doing things, which it is, and he ended up inventing the randomized control trial, where you put different people in different groups, and you don't know who's getting what, and you get the results, and then it's, okay, this one works, this one doesn't work, let's do this one, because the randomized control trial has shown that this is how it works. Or this one works better, conclusively, objectively, this is the better approach. The randomized control trial has since become the gold standard in medical research around the world. And it's developed so many different drugs, different medicines. It's saved hundreds of millions of lives, unquestionably. And it also led to the rapid development of the COVID vaccines, which allowed us to end the pandemic and stop the lockdowns. So which means that if you count the Industrial Revolution too, the Welsh miners have kick-started the world economy twice. Like they say, everyone, you're welcome. But no, it really comes up. This is stuff we've done. We've contributed to the world, but we don't tend to sort of talk about that. And that can obviously have a big impact on whether or not you're leadership stuff, because if you aren't willing to talk about your achievements, then people don't know about them. And if you don't know about them, then they don't want to put you in charge of stuff. And there's other things too, like the idea that we could achieve things is sort of anathema to some people. Like you must keep your head down. When I was in school, I was atypical in my school. So Undersouth Comprehensive School, it's gone now because, well, for good reason. Like over 1,000 students. But in the years I did my A levels, if you added up the A level physics, chemistry, biology lessons, you got 7 students, and 3 of them were me, because I was doing all the sciences. So if I got a bad mark on an exam, the entire school average would go down, which was a lot of pressure. But then I sort of applied to university and things. I got an interview at Cambridge, which was, wow, okay, Cambridge. So all I knew was that it's that really fancy university that is the best one, apparently. So I went to my careers advisor and said, so I've got an interview at Cambridge. What can you tell me about Cambridge? And my careers advisor, again, consider the name of that job, careers advisor. He's supposed to give me advice about career. His full advice to me was, Dean, the only people who go to Cambridge are gays and Russian spies. That's what I had to work with. Now, I've since found out that's not true, but it is actually sort of, it's indicative. Like, whenever you think of Cambridge, like the sort of the hoity-toity snooty, they reached out and invited me. So they'd made the effort But when I sort of spoke to my sort of school and like the people who were supposed to be supporting me, they didn't want to know. I said, no, you mustn't do that. That is not what we do. And that's not a helpful mindset. You know, I mean, I did go to the interview. I didn't get in because I don't belong there. That's a whole other thing. And the thing of knowing everyone else. I mean, it's a very classic Welsh joke. I mean, Ellis James, the comedian, he has the Cymru connection on his show. Where they give him like 20 seconds to identify how he knows someone in Wales. I've been on it. I was one of them once. And I actually messaged him this morning to ask if I could talk about it in this. So yes, we are connected. And it went to the point I actually got quite frustrated when I first became sort of vaguely prominent. And people say, oh, you Welsh, do you know Rob Brydon? Do you know Tom Jones? Like, no, we're not, it's a small country. It's not actually a village. But then in my second book, Charlotte Church was in it. And someone said, how do you get Charlotte Church in your book? I said, well, Rod Gilbert texted me and said, oh, Christ. Yeah, like now people say, how do you know? Oh, we're Welsh. We just meet at the AGM. But that can be, like, it's nice. It's like, you always find someone you know wherever you go with it. That's great. But also in a leadership context, it can be a bit tricky. Because when you lead in people you don't know or like aren't connected to, it's a lot easier than leading Di from the shop or like leading Clive the boot who runs the shoe place. Like, these are all, when you know everyone, or you expect to know everyone, you tend to form bonds. But sometimes being a good leader needs objectivity. You need to be able to make the hard decisions and make the hard choices. And it's kind of harder to do that if and when you are sort of friends with everyone, or you expect that to be the case. So that could also affect sort of a Welsh mindset into becoming a good leader. So these are just some things to consider about how being Welsh might impact on your leadership abilities. So in summary, Welsh culture identity impact our attitude to leaders and leadership in many ways. Some are good, some are bad, some are both, some are neither. It just is something to keep in mind. But things are changing. Obviously, recent elections and sort of push for the language and things like that, and more presence on the world stage. But it will take time before deeply ingrained social attitudes noticeably shift. So that's a basic summary of how the brain affects leadership and how being Welsh affects leadership. Hopefully that's of some use. Thank you very much.
Diolch yn fawr iawn, Dean. Oedd hwnna yn ofnadwy o ddifyr, yn ofnadwy o ddoniol, a wrth i chi gyfeirio at y syniad yma ar y diwedd fod pawb yn efo pawb, oedd o'n ei fi feddwl am y dywediad 6 degrees of separation, a da ni'n gwybod yng Nghymru bod o'n 1 degree of separation wrth gwrs. A petai ni gyd yn siarad efo'n gilydd ac yn creu rhyw fath o fap o'r holl gysylltiadau sydd gynnon ni, fydda ni mor agos. A fel ydych chi'n awgrymu, mae hynny'n dda, mae hynny yn gallu bod yn byth drwg. Ond o'n i'n meddwl bod o'n rhyfeddol hefyd y syniad na o y gyd-berthynas rhwng nodweddion Cymreig sydd yn cydblethu gydag arweinyddiaeth. A os dwi byth yn ffeindio miliwn o bunnau lawr y soffa, na i dalu chi i wneud y gwaith ymchwil yna, achos dwi'n meddwl bod yna wir werth mewn dadbacio hyn ymhellach a meddwl am be ydy'r gyd-berthynas yna rhwng arweinyddiaeth a nodweddion Cymreigdod. Rwan, dwi erbyn hyn wedi deall sut mae hwn yn gweithio, ac felly dwi'n gallu gofyn y cwestiynau yn syth i chi, Dean. Cwestiwn difyr iawn yma. Can the brain differentiate between being respected and being liked by those we lead to stop us being people pleasers? Felly, y berthynas yna rhwng parch ar y naill law a chael ein hoffi ar y llaw arall.
Yeah, we tend to be very good at identifying complex connections between how we feel about other people. That's a big part of, like the argument is, or the theory is, that's why we've evolved such big brains in the first place. That's a key skill to have, sort of understanding like what someone else is in connection with you. So we can acknowledge, we can respect someone, but also we don't have to like them. Like there are plenty of people who, perhaps the most neutral example, sports fans. Like there are lots of, obviously, the World Cup's on. It was like, that guy is a very good player. I don't like him because he clearly has skills, he clearly has abilities, but as a person I don't like him, or he plays for the wrong team because I don't like them. There's a lot of emotion involved in that. So yeah, we are quite good at differentiating between respect and being liked. The people-pleasing stuff is hard because it's also like, everyone's complex, everyone's individual is quite different. So if you go out of your way to sort of please people, to make them like you, that can be quite transparent. People can recognize that. It's a classic thing of, like, if you try and tell someone, if you're a bad singer, people are like, oof, that's not great. But if you tell someone a joke and they don't think it's funny, they get actively annoyed at that. It's not like it's taken as a personal attack or something, because we sort of perceive it as being manipulated. So it's like someone saying, like, I'm going to tell you this joke because I think I know your humor, and I'm going to make you laugh. And then they fail. It's like, okay, so you assumed you knew me. You assumed to take authority over my emotions, and you didn't do it. I find that objectionable. So when you are also trying to make people like you, you have to be very good at that in order to not be transparent. But when your attempts are seen as being quite obvious, it can have the opposite effect. Like you see the thing of a lot of packaging as like, hello, isn't this lovely? Like, or like the hole in the wall, or like sort of the innocent smooth is bad for that. Like, isn't it so twee? Shut up, just give me a drink. It's like you don't want that level of engagement from like a juice box or like a bank. Like, we're all family. We're not family. You just got my money. Give it to me. That's I know some families are like that, but when these attempts are made and are recognised as being attempts, then that can be really counterproductive. So yeah, it's a tricky tightrope to walk, that one.
Un cwestiwn yma ynglyn â'r cyd-destun Cymreig, a mae o'n holi, how do we use the Welsh context to our advantage? A dwi'n cymryd beth mae'r cwestiynwr yn holi mewn gwirionedd ydy yn ein harweinyddiaeth, hynny yw sut mae defnyddio Cymru, Cymreigdod, y Gymraeg ac yn y blaen o ran bod yn well arweinwyr.
Yeah, I mean, there's loads of scope for that, I think. I mean, I sort of leaned into the downsides of it in the talk, because I think that's when you're proud of where you're from, you will look at the positives all the time. So I like to sort of keep an objective viewpoint at the forefront. So again, it can be good, can be bad. Let's take things as they are. I do think, obviously, there's a lot of potential for, like, say, bigging up Welsh achievements, Welsh contributions to the world, because we don't, that's actually we don't do. Obviously, we do that, but other people do it a lot more. Like these other cultures are far more loud and proud about it, and we have far more modesty, which, again, can be quite reassuring, can be quite refreshing. But I think there's a lot more scope for us to do that. Say, like, this is what we've done, and then don't have to be apologetic about it. That's sort of quite good as well. I think we've got more sort of the recent election results showed that there's a bit more identity there, and I do think that's changing. I do think sort of having like, hang on, we don't have to sort of just sit there and take that, or we can sort of put ourselves forward a bit more. That's sort of becoming more of a thing, which I think is good. And I think the language stuff is, I think people kind of like it. Like you get people who complain about some bilingual signs, but like, I don't think we should listen to those people. Like, go away then. You haven't got to be here if you don't like it that much. It's a sort of. I do think we can push back on that. We can say a bit more. I don't think we're sort of inclined not to, and I don't think that's necessary. But yeah, I think we could embrace our positives a lot more outwardly than sort of just like acknowledge and accept them. I think that's something which could happen. But there's loads of scope for taking advantage of like the community orientations and the sort of like the familiarity everyone has with each other. It's people find it quite charming when they hear about it, but at first they don't believe it, but then they sort of, really? Yeah, that's a thing. Yeah, it does happen. So, so I think there's a lot of scope for doing stuff. Like, just like depends on who wants to do it and like getting the energy there to make it happen.
A quick story for you. I was in the capital a few years ago, and my best friend from university came over, and she lives in England. She's originally from India. And we were walking down St Mary Street, and I saw the then Prime Minister, Carwyn Jones. I was like, hiya, Carwyn, like this. And my friend was like, who is this person? It's the Prime Minister. So that sense of familiarity, which doesn't surprise us necessarily, but really surprised her in terms of people knowing each other. He didn't know me, by the way, but I knew him. Cwestiwn nesaf, mae'r unigolyn yma'n gweithio yn byd iechyd, ac felly wedi gorfod dysgu teimlo yn anghyffyrddus gyda diffyg sicrwydd, uncertainty. Beth mae ei ymenydd nhw yn gwneud i ganiatáu iddyn nhw fyw efo'r diffyg sicrwydd yna?
Yeah, the uncertainty thing is, it's more of a background noise as well. Like, we just don't like it. We actually do sort of find it it's stressful, low-key stressful. It's not like sort of, constant palpitations and stuff. But there are, people have ways around that. Like they mentioned the superstition thing and just sort of way to, well, I'm going to impose some certainty on this world or the world around me because I just need to. It's sort of like a psychological comfort blanket. It doesn't really affect anything. It can lead to some strange places, though. Like you get a lot of conspiracy theories now, which is a lot of time boiled down to people saying that events I don't like events being random. I want to assume someone's in charge, and therefore they create this whole conspiracy, which is obviously, elaborate and fantastical, but it's psychologically comforting to think, oh, that wasn't just, that calamity didn't just happen. It was arranged, and that can be really sort of reassuring on a strange sort of level. Like I say, you're on a plane, you'd rather a drunk pilot than no pilot, and that's sort of colourful metaphor, but that's the sort of thing that happens. But it's we do learn to live with it, because you can't really get rid of it. The world is a random place a lot of the time. So, but it's sort of how much attention you give to it, how much sort of emphasis you put on it psychologically. That can change as well. You can sort of like, okay, I don't know, but I'm going to find out. Trial and error, just learning things, having confidence in your own abilities. These are all things which can contribute to sort of a lesser impact of the level of uncertainty. I guess also good leaders sort of do provide that for other people, as in, okay, they're in charge, therefore I don't need to know, or I can be certain that they are good at this, and therefore the uncertainty isn't going to bother me. So it's another factor where leaders can be really useful.
A cwestiwn perthnasol arall hefyd ydy un yn ymwneud ag ofyn. Is it true that the fear of judgment, i.e. being judged, affects our success as a leader more than the fear of failure?
I certainly think there's an argument for that, yeah. I mean, it depends on the individual again, but some people really don't mind being judged by others at all. Like they have bulletproof confidence, which is admirable in some ways, but also bad in others. But yeah, it's a lot of people, that will be the thing which puts them off. I mean, so I've done stand-up comedy quite a few times, like a lot. But also between my first degree and my PhD, I worked for like 2 years embalming cadavers for the medical school. And when I tell people both my jobs, so like comedian and cadaver embalmer, they also like, it's always like, oh, I could never do that, to the comedian bit. Like, so you could quite happily handle dead bodies all day, but like, oh, I can't imagine standing in front of people and saying stuff. No, but that fear of rejection is really quite palpable. It really is quite, it's quite significant, because like, we are social creatures, and being rejected by others en masse is really quite terrifying. So that obviously will be a big factor in leadership if you are particularly sensitive to that.
You've talked a lot about politics, and this question relates to exactly that. How can better understanding of our idiot brain be used to make this angry country feel better? There's a value judgment there.
I suppose, yeah. That it's something I'm going to focus on in the next book, actually. But it is, I do think it would be useful to understand like how people react and perceive things en masse. And there's a lot of political stuff I think is effort to manipulate, perhaps too strong, but influence people by a very crude and sort of obvious means. And I do think that is something which has led to like the problems we're in now. Is in like the whole thing of spin, like language. That was a big thing in the 90s Blair era. But ultimately, what it is people being trained to look like they're saying something without saying anything. And that's sort of like it's safer that way. Like I've just said complex words. I'm going to commit to anything. But now obviously that led to people wanting authenticity in politicians, and it's a lot more. You can be a lot more confident and authentic when you're willing to just make stuff up. And that sort of gives you like advantage of like yeah, I'm just going to blame that lot. Yeah, I'm you see, he's the one who's talking. And that's, naming no names, but that is sort of like one of the many aspects of like, well, if you just had a better understanding of how people function, we could avoid this, we could sidestep this. And yeah, so I do think there's a lot to be said for better understanding of how we work, leading to better politics.
Ac yn y cyswllt yna wedyn, mae'r cwestiwn nesaf yn ymwneud efo polareiddio. Mae'r byd wedi bolareiddio. Sut allwn ni ddefnyddio yr ymenydd i helpu agor meddyliau? A beth ydy rôl arweinydd yn y cyswllt yna?
Yeah, the polarisation is obviously a big problem with just the general word and stuff. And obviously, the online world has helped that a lot, because now you can find people who agree with you much more easily, and then just only ever talk to them. And obviously people in the wider mainstream manipulate that. So yeah, polarisation is a big problem. It just tends to be not, it's one of those things, it's a big problem, but it's also can be relatively easily resolved if people make the initial effort to step outside the group, which is causing the polarisation. And there's loads of studies that show that the strongest anti-immigrant sentiment is from places with no immigrants. And they're there, people are just fine. It's just people, that's fine. So like if you can sort of get people to talk to others outside of that group. So someone who's charismatic, someone who's confident, someone who's empathetic, and who could communicate with them in the right way could be a useful part of saying, yeah, no, you think that, but how about this? And that can be the first step which leads to better outcomes.
Oeddech chi'n siarad yn tua diwedd y sgwrs am o'n i rioed i meddwl am hyn, mawr cywilydd, am y cysylltiadau Cymreig yna efo sefydlu'r gwasanaeth iechyd, y datganiad annibyniaeth Unol Daleithiau America, randomised control trials, ac yn y blaen. Sut felly ydyn ni fel Cymru yn dod dros yr agwedd? Dwi'n meddwl bod fi'n gallu gwneud rhywbeth yn hytrach na dwi'n gwybod bod fi'n gallu gwneud rhywbeth.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for the objective acknowledgement that I don't know I can do it, I think I can. So bulletproof confidence can be useful, but also leads to some unfortunate places a lot of the time. So I think a modicum of awareness that, I'm not certain that this will go exactly right is potentially useful. But yeah, it's, I think it's when you form a culture which sort of doesn't really emphasise the things we have done outside of certain areas. Like, you can't tell me like Wales isn't a culture which is okay with losing. We have turned wooden spoons into an art form. we embraced it. Like I think that says it all. But we are, but we do sort of have this sort of like, don't worry about it attitude to the things we've done. I just think maybe better education that we have done these things. Because I said all that stuff about randomised control trial. Most people I talked to in Wales, they really? I had no idea that was a thing, because it isn't sort of told, it's not sort of emphasised. It's something which is like really vital part of human society, which we sort of, Archie was Scottish, but we provided the basis for it. And again, the sacrifice of the miners, that's like twice over. They've sort of like literally saved the world. So so that's so I think we should just be more aware of that in education. Stop now.
Mae gen I sawl llwygaru yn fy nghartre, felly jyst isio amddiffyn y llwygaru yna am eiliad. Un cwestiwn ola. We hear about the power of storytelling in leadership, and we're known for our stories. How do stories work in our brains, and how could that help leadership in Wales?
Yeah, that's a really good one, because we are very sort of people responsive. Like, we've learned to accept information from other people. That's how we've evolved. That's why you can give someone like reams and reams of published data, and they might read it and go, okay. But then someone goes, but I've got a friend who works with that. They go, oh, see, because we take information from other people. That's how we've evolved. So stories, we like a narrative, we like structure, we like a pattern. So this random information doesn't strike us in an emotional level. Our brains use emotion to decide what's important. So a story is sort of engaging and evocative, whereas facts are not. And that's why we get sort of the fixated on the first one. And of course, we also have a lot of stories, like the Mabinogion is full of them. A lot of them are insane, but they are there. And we've got a good culture of that. So I think we could possibly embrace that, as in, we've had so many stories today of good leaders doing good leadership things, and that's often the most compelling part. So yeah, we could definitely use that to promote our abilities and things like that.
Wel, dwi wedi mwynhau gwrando ar eich straeon chi. Nes i mwynhau yn fawr iawn clywed straeon am mam. Diolch yn fawr iawn i Dr Dyn Burnett.